My name is Lalu Davies Yemiton, and you're listening to My Brother Podcast.
Think, a simple word, not uncommon, commonly used within the English language. But a particular company coined that term and made it a central focus of what their business was all about. My guest today knows all too much about what used to be international business machines, which we mostly know as IBM. Rod Atkins, thank you so much for making yourself available for My Brother Podcast. I'd love to launch right into it. Would you just start by sharing a little synopsis about yourself, your background, and who you are?
So first of all, I really appreciate this opportunity today. And, that one word is actually a very powerful word. And it's probably a word that best characterizes me. My start is really a humble start. I have very humble beginnings. I came from a family with strong values. Values like hard work, values like responsibility, values like staying committed. And I always sort of describe myself to people as this person that is imperfection at its best. And it's sort of an odd way to sort of describe myself, but I always tell people that, Rod Atkins always wanted to be a politician, but I concluded I wasn't skilled enough. I always wanted to be an athlete. And I was pretty good at sports, but I really wasn't talented enough. Of course, I wanted to be an entertainer because I always thought I had special gifts in that area. But at the end of the day, I really wasn't as expressive enough. But I was gifted and special enough to become an engineer. And when I think about what engineers do, it is our role in life to figure out how to change the world and how to provide capabilities that will make our lives better. And it all sort of connects to that one word that IBM has embraced over the years called think. The last thing I'll tell you about me before I started to advance in my career was some of the things that shaped me in terms of who I am today. Clearly my family infrastructure, and the impact from both my parents, my mom and dad. But I also had great influence from my sensei. I started in martial arts at a very, very early age. And I remember he would always talk about three things. As a matter of fact, three has become one of my lucky numbers. But he would always say, life is about balance, focus, and timing. It's always about being balanced, staying focused, and then timing, being in the right place at the right time. So when I sort of connect those sort of learnings with my strong family values, and then the third component, my high school art teacher, Eric Jenkins, who happened to be an incredible human being and fraternity brother and mentor. He also talked about three things. He always talked about creativity, the imagination, curiosity, which is one of my favorite words, and a word that's, you can argue, that's closely linked to think. And then I sort of converted that to the art of daydreaming, because I always use daydreaming form of placing myself in places and in situations, and it would allow me to role play through those scenarios. So when I look at the influences in my life, from my family infrastructure, being involved early in martial arts, and then although being a science, but appreciating the partnership or the impact that arts have, on the science. That I think that has sort of shaped who Rod Atkins is today.
Very well stated. So, talk to me a bit about your upbringing. Take us back to Miami, where it all began.
So I grew up in a section of Miami near a place that I think has become somewhat known, Liberty City, which is a very challenged part of Miami. So I grew up in a very sort of tough environment. But again, a lot of that was offset with, I think, what I would describe as great educators, um, a neighborhood that really operated as a community because the neighborhood sort of invested their time in the kids growing up in the community. Um, and and then I went through a series of schools, my elementary, middle school, high school. It turns out my wife, Michelle, who is a lifelong partner, also grew up actually in the same neighborhood, same school, same teachers, but we met at Georgia Tech. And I'll comment on that later, but one of the purpose assignments I was given in life was to look after Michelle at Georgia Tech. And here we are, I don't know, 37 years later, and I'm still looking after Michelle. Actually, she's actually more like she's looking after me. Yeah. So I had uh, a very good, let's say, childhood growing up in Miami. Although it was aspects of it was tough, but I also learned how to be the person that I am today. Through the things that we would do as a family, the things that we would do as a community, the things that I would do as part of my education process. So I have very fond memories of Miami establishing a foundation for me moving forward.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. Like, it's great to hear about having a family structure and you talking about some of those early influences and your recognition of your sort of talents and limitations. At what age did you start martial arts, and what were some of your early, perhaps adolescent years like prior to you starting high school?
So I started martial arts at the age of 11, and like most things, I always try to be at the top of my game at pretty much everything I get involved in, and it's just really sort of a practice, maybe a habit, maybe it's DNA, but I was in martial arts at age 11. I actually became an accomplished belt by age 14. And it was really interesting when I think about some of the reasons I became a martial artist because, at the time, given the environment, you always want to have some additional tools in terms of, I'll call it self-protection. But it turns out martial arts was actually more than that. It was really more about a mindset. And it was really more about discipline. And although you were learning techniques that can be applied to self-protection, it really turns out that the let's call it the insights and the learnings was really about how to be much more disciplined as a human being. And it's back to those three principles that my sensei taught around balance, focus, and timing. And I always think about those three things as I applied it to my career, and also how I applied it to my life in general. So the martial arts was a very central part of my foundation. As a matter of fact, I continued to be very active in the arts for a number of years, where I actually participated in various tournaments around the world, and became very good at it. And then for a very brief period of time, I tested my capabilities in terms of teaching the arts. And the form of the arts that I studied was a Japanese style called Nisigo Juru. And the reason I gravitated more towards that style, and it's sort of my personality, it's really a sort of a straightforward, power-based style. It's not a sweeping or a highly I'll call it finesse style, but it's really about a direct line of contact. And that's sort of how I try to approach things in general in life, where I try to say, here we are, here is where we need to go, and then try to sort of come up with the right recipe to get there as quickly as possible. So the Nisigo Drew style was really, and by the way, you're a genius when you think about these things, when you look backwards, right? So, but I can see how all these things sort of shape my behavior and my practice, and at the end of the day, a level of discipline when it applied to just how I play and how I work.
So yeah, and I'm gathering, and I often ask about what people do outside of just being raised as children, because I think sports sometimes can teach you teamwork, and so in a sense, martial arts taught you discipline. So you've got this great foundation. You were a standout student in high school. So talk to me about your high school years and how you decided to settle on Georgia Tech, because you could have had your option of places to pursue your collegiate studies at.
Yeah. So in addition to the martial arts, I was active in sports as well. I was active in high school sports, and I was became pretty accomplished in track and field. Like many kids, I started off in many sports: baseball, basketball, and then I actually converged to track and field. I was also a very good student. Um, as a matter of fact, I would be probably studying most of the time while when a lot of my colleagues were out socializing and having a good time. And it wasn't like I didn't participate in that, but my allocation of time was more towards my academics versus my social life. And it turns out I actually enjoyed studying. I actually enjoyed going to school. As a matter of fact, I received an award because I had perfect attendance from the first grade through my senior year. I did not miss a day of school, which is I think actually remarkable. But it's just a statement of the fact that I actually enjoy education. And one of the things that I have evolved to talk a lot about is lifelong learning, because one of the pieces of advice that I give people is that learning is sort of a lifelong opportunity. Whether you are age 8, whether you're 80, there's always an opportunity to learn something new and to learn something relevant. And one of the foundational, principles behind who I am was the fact that I really enjoy learning. I really enjoy learning new things, and it's back to again one of my favorite words: curiosity. I am always intrigued by just how things work. I'm always just sort of looking for sort of that additional detail in many of the things I engage in. So I'm just sort of a lifelong student here.
So you graduate high school at the top of your class. Why Georgia Tech? And how did you make that transition?
So to wrap up my high school, I ended up in leadership positions, well, building council, president. I ended up valedictorian of my class. I graduated number one. And at the time, I was very intrigued by the notion of computers changing the way the world works. During the high school years, I would tinker with some of the capabilities we had in our high school. And this was before this modern age of how we do computations and computing and analytics. Back then, we had a system which was a back card system where you would write your programs, and it was on a series of cards. This is the high technology back then.
Yeah.
More of a batch process in terms of how the algorithms and computations would work, and I sort of picked up a deep interest in that. So by the time I got to my senior year, I concluded that I wanted to be a computer scientist, and at the time, I concluded that Georgia Tech was one of the better schools in the nation. But I did not have a direct line to Georgia Tech. I ended up as a student for 3 years at Rollins College, 2 years at Georgia Tech. And the reason I chose that route is because, again, this is back to my appreciation of the arts. 3 years at a liberal arts school, although my emphasis was in science, it was an emphasis in physics, but I just felt that that was an incredible opportunity in terms of combining the arts with science. 3 years at Rollins, 2 years at Georgia Tech, but it also turned out to be a great deal because you get 2 degrees as part of this arrangement. It's called the dual degree program. So I spent 3 years at Rollins, and then studied electrical engineering and computer science at Georgia Tech. It was actually the point I met my lifelong partner because she was 3 years removed. Although we came from the same neighborhood, same schools, same teachers, and I met Michelle on the campus of Georgia Tech.
So what led to that chance interaction between you and her?
Well, I think it was an arrangement, but a great arrangement. Michelle was actually a very gifted student as well, national merit scholar, graduated second in her class, and was very active in academic related programs as well as community programs. So as a freshman at Georgia Tech, and she decided to take sort of a different path. She ended up majoring in accounting and in industrial management. And I met her on campus, sort of two reasons. One, I was asked to look after her, so I was taking my assignment seriously. But I also ended up as a tutor, and I was tutoring her roommates. And it turns out that opportunity to tutor her roommates in math and science allowed me more access. And, and it has been such a wonderful opportunity for both of us. And we're doing, I think, some amazing things as partners.
Yes, indeed. So you complete your studies, you meet who you don't know is going to be your lifelong partner. I'm sure there were a lot of other incredible things that happened while at Georgia Tech. But how did you end up wrapping up, and what led you to your first job?
So again, I always had this desire. I had actually 2 desires coming out of high school. Go to Georgia Tech and work for IBM, because IBM at the time was a very big name in technology. And I also knew IBM was responsible for building computers. But at the time, I didn't realize the impact that IBM was was actually having on the world because, as I started to study IBM, IBM was instrumental in helping get a human on the moon, through the Apollo program. IBM was instrumental in terms of the back office system that manage our banking infrastructure, the airline reservation system. So we started to think about the impact it was having. It was more than just think about IBM as a computer company. It was actually a innovation company that was building solutions that was transforming industries and business. And so the more and more I read about IBM, I felt that that was the company for me. And I ended up, as part of the job recruiting process, getting an opportunity to speak with IBM. And I was able to, showcase some potential to the point where they hired me as an engineer. Working on my first job, I was working on peripheral devices that are attached to these large systems. And I did that for a year, and I convinced IBM that it would be in the company's best interest, but it was actually in my best interest to send me back for my graduate degree. And after a year of being a very good employee, IBM actually agreed to invest in me. And I went back to Georgia Tech, and it happens to align with Michelle's senior year at Georgia Tech. And I acquired my master's degree in electrical engineering with a concentration in computer engineering. So that's sort of how my early years of an influence coming out of Georgia Tech and being hired by IBM.
So it sounds like you were mastering more than just engineer during that year.
Yeah, and again, looking back on this, it sounds sort of well organized and structured, but I'm pretty sure that there was probably some degree of unstructured and chaos then. But the good news was, and this is back to balance, focus, and timing. I was focused. I was very focused on becoming an engineer. And I would say a balanced engineer. That's the reason why I wanted the liberal arts influence as part of my engineering education. And I was very focused on becoming that engineer and focused on working for a company like IBM, because it was back to this notion that companies like IBM could change the world. And that was one of the reasons why I was very, very interested in IBM's value proposition.
So you obtain your master's degree, you go back to working full time at IBM. What comes next? And presumably at this time, I mean, you have to be on the forefront of sort of having folks really thinking about not just the future of the company, but presumably IBM at that time probably still didn't have, this broad diversity that might have happened in later years. So how did you find mentors early on, and how did you sort of start shepherding your career during those early years?
So it turns out IBM has always been a company that was focused on diversity and inclusion. And the good news for me was I had some very good mentors over the years. So when I finished my graduate work and entered back to IBM, I actually came into the company where I think was the most profound period in the information technology movement. And that's when computing was always viewed as sort of this centrally managed resource, in some closed area with people wear white jackets. That computing became personal. And this was sort of the dawn of what we call the client server era, where computing ended up in your home as a connected device into a larger back-end information technology infrastructure. And that was sort of a fundamental shift that was occurring when I went back to IBM. So I had the great fortune to be part of what I'll call the personal computer revolution, if you will. And I had some really, really great assignments, tough assignments, high-risk assignments that allowed me to scale as that market opportunity matured. But I also had help because I had different types of mentors along the way. And when I talk about mentoring, I usually talk about mentoring. It was also, I call it the notion of fit for purpose, because I had different types of mentors depending on what my skill or development gap was. And I would use my mentoring relationships to actually help me develop in certain areas. So early in my career, some of my mentors were more technical because I was on a technical path. And then later in my career, some of my mentors were much more, I would say, either had a financial orientation, had a general management orientation, or they had experiences in terms of working with outside markets, industries, and companies. So I would leverage different types of skill sets as part of my mentoring process. And many of my mentors, they were people that looked like me, leveraging diverse talent in the company. And some of my mentors were folks that they didn't look like me. They were they wasn't underrepresented minorities, but they had a skill set and a set of experiences that was to my that would benefit me in terms of my overall growth and development. One of the great things about IBM, it was actually a company that really believed in diversity and inclusion. And one of the things I'm proud of is that I'm actually sort of a key, I'll say, component of that diversity story, because actually became the first Black or first African American senior vice president in the company's history. And that was through a series of some really, really tough P&L job where I had jobs to get us into new markets. I had jobs where I had to help either fix a broken business, and I had jobs where you take a mature market opportunity and you scale it. So I had those various opportunities. I also had a job where at one point, I think I could argue I had the largest development organization in the world, because it was a development organization that spent half of the company's investments in research and development, and it had 100,000 plus computer scientists and engineers. So I had some great opportunities that I performed, right outcomes, and actually earned the seat at the table as being the first African American senior vice president in IBM. And that distinction occurred in 2007.
Right. So before you get to the level of having those P&L jobs, one would assume you're a highly technical expert in a highly technical company. It's almost like big companies like IBM hire a bunch of talented engineers. But early in your development process, you talked about taking on some tough challenges. What distinguished you? What about? I know you've talked about those early lessons of balance, focus on timing. But what were the tools or the core components that allowed you to not just thrive, but you were distinguished in what you did sufficiently to set you on a track of what came down the line?
So I always had this notion that you are only as good as your last job. So and the reason I always had that notion is because performance is really about what have you done lately, and although your history of success is great, but people remember what you have done recently. So I always focused on establishing a track record of success, but at the same time, I was very focused on my current period of performance. So that was one thing that I would characterize as part of my recipe. The other part of my recipe was I did not shy away from the tough jobs, and I really focused on taking some of the tough jobs early in my career, although it was more risk, but at the same time, it was potentially more reward. And again, when I connect that with being just very focused on performance and producing good results, that also added to the equation. The third thing I would say is, and even to this day, I will always tell people you should always know, or at least have a view, what your next two jobs or your next two opportunities will be. And the reason I tell people to sort of have that notion in their head is because if I sit here and say, I want to be the chairman of the board of company X, well, the moment I sort of make that declaration to myself, it allows me to say, okay, now, what are the derivatives, what are the inhibitors in terms of me getting to be the chairman of company X? And I might find out that there are some things I need to work on in terms of skills, uh, certain types of experiences, certain there might be aspects of education and training. So it identifies the gaps that I can go address. And when I address those gaps, it allows me to be more competitive when the consideration process starts. So I always have this notion to say, hey, always sort of have that view, but use that view to enhance yourself, to focus on where the elements that may not be as complete as they need to be, and go fix those things. So those were the things that I focused on. And then last but not least, I would always surround myself with knowledgeable people. And I always talk about leadership and how leaders should behave and how leaders should think. And one of the hallmarks of good leadership is surrounding yourself with knowledgeable people. And that was as part of people that worked with me, people that worked in my organization, the types of mentors that fit the purpose point I was making that I would pick, that I pointed out earlier, and the type of mentors that I would pick that sort of helped me. So that was part of my overall recipe.
I wanted to go back to something you said to see if you can perhaps illustrate for us what was perhaps an example of a tough assignment that you had to take on. And you talk about this element of risk. And I don't think it's something people often think about associated with a job. They think entrepreneurs take risks, but you said you had to take on certain positions that were not just tough, but there was risk. So can you sort of illustrate what kind of position and what risk meant in the context?
Yeah, and I would say almost most of my jobs in IBM had some element of downside for Rod, but they also had, I think, the upside outweighed the downside. So one job, um, it sort of presented to me as I was being asked, but I was sort of think I was really being told. But it was our Unix business that was performing poorly in the marketplace. It was probably somewhere between fourth and fifth in market share. And we had at the time the chairman and CEO that basically said, we, IBM going forward, our business model is not to continue to invest in aspects of our business that's not performing. And, we will, he was on record as saying that, we will take action for those various businesses. So I was actually asked or told to go take over this business. And it was really a turnaround opportunity. And I remember the conversation going something like, Rod, we want you to consider taking this. You have over the weekend to think about it. You just need to tell us on Monday, what's required to take this business. And so fortunately, I was astute enough to know that I really wasn't being asked. So basically said, I don't need until Monday. I will gladly step in, leading, the turnaround of this business. But a couple things that we will need to negotiate, and that is location and compensation. And it turns out this business was started in a part of IBM, Austin, Texas. And it was a division headquarters job. And typically that role that I was taking over reports in our Somers, Armonk headquarters location. And the proposition that I put on the table was that given the 18 months to 2 years, I'll turn this business around. I needed to be in the location at the core of where the work is done. And that was Austin, Texas. So I relocated my family. We moved to Austin, Texas. And I'm happy to say after 2 years, the business moved from fourth to fifth in market share to number 2. And within another year and a half, it became number 1 in market share. And even to this day, I believe it's, I haven't checked lately, but I believe it's probably still the market leading Unix high performance computing platform in the market. That's an example of taking something that was on the edge of the company divesting in potentially, putting the right focus on the business, turning it around, and becoming a positive contributor to IBM overall P&L. And I had examples. Earlier in my career, I was asked to help make our desktop PCs mobile. So I was sent for a period of time to Japan to work with our Untitled laboratory to come up with different types of solutions to convert desktop computing to mobile computing. That was sort of a high-risk proposition. And quite frankly, the first 2 or 3 shots at it, we didn't quite get it right. The first mobile PC was very heavy. It looked like a sewing machine, and it weighed 35 pounds. And it had some technologies that had to mature, like the battery would last for 20 minutes. It had a screen that was probably the size of the screen on your iPhone or your mobile phone. And it had removable media. And the amount of information you could store on that media was not much. Although back then we thought it was quite a bit compared to today's standards. It was not much. So I had opportunities like that. The other highest opportunity was IBM getting into, at the time we called it basic computing, and this was in 2000. Today, it's called Internet of Things. And that's an example of we had a vision of computing moving into things that don't normally look like a computer. So this was sort of the early stages of wearables, like all these different wearable devices.
Yeah.
We have, and so it was the early days of all these different things being connected and becoming intelligent devices. And we had a notion that said, boy, the more intelligence you embed is going to create new types of transactions and new opportunities. And now we're seeing the world that we're living in today, a world that is about information and analytics, moving more and more towards things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I had an opportunity to be one of the pioneers that worked on what we call pervasive computing, which became Smarter Planet, which is now today Internet of Things. So those are examples of different types. And that last job was an ill-defined job that did not have a lot of definition around it, and we had to put discipline, structure, execution, and focus. And that was a high risk. All of those were high risk type opportunities.
Yeah,
but rewarding.
Certainly. If you could indulge me, would you perhaps walk us through in sort of a chronological fashion what different positions, maybe 5 or 6 positions prior to reaching that first P&L position, what led to those shifts and transitions in position, and what the significance of landing your first P&L job represented?
So the best equation to land a P&L job is, I talked about, in the industry beginning to talk about this a lot, it's called, you want to be T-shaped.
Yeah.
You want to look like a T, right?
And if I could just interject for us, P&L means profit and loss job.
Yes, it means a profit and loss statement. And it's
yeah.
Financial performance of the company. Right.
Sure.
So, and what I mean by T-shape, coming out of school, the vertical part of the T is typically what we acquire. That is, pick up skills and knowledge in a specific domain. Yeah. And a lot of times, a lot of your early jobs, you have you actually end up, perfecting your capabilities in your given skill area or your domain. And by the way, that's necessary. So my first 3 to 4 years at IBM was really about becoming a better engineer, taking on more engineering assignments, successfully executing those assignments, getting recognized for those assignments. And by being recognized, it was either more money or more responsibility with a better title. So it was really about that vertical part of the T. As you start to approach management or leadership jobs or managing P&Ls, it's really about the horizontal part of the T. And that's really when you have to start perfecting your capabilities in other areas, like your written and verbal communication skills, your critical thinking, your analytical skills, skills in turn, I call it business acumen. And then we talked about P&Ls, which is the profit and loss statements, which is a financial expression of how the company is performing. You also want to pick up what I would call some of those business acumen skills. So understand how to manage the finances associated with running a project or running a business segment, because you have to worry about at some point how you manage costs, how you manage within a budget in terms of the expenses. And then if you are in a job that is generating top line performance for the company, you also have to understand how you generate revenues for the business opportunity. So over time, I had more jobs, that started to evolve from just pure technical delivery to more having aspects of management where I moved from doing engineering to managing engineers. And that was still sort of in the technical arena, but it started to introduce responsibilities like managing people, like managing budgets. And then I evolved to a point where I started managing departments. And this would be managing managers. And again, that was still within the engineering ranks, where I was really focused on delivering a portfolio of products and solutions. And then really when the big, I would say, inflection point in my career occurred is when I was being viewed as a general manager, where not only I had the opportunity to manage engineering projects, there were other dimensions of leadership added to my set of responsibilities, like having worldwide operations. So although we were building the products, operation teams to make sure that the products were in the right places at the right time. Adding in sales functions, the resources that's in the geographic regions around the world that has a relationship with the customers and the various opportunities to sell those products. And then marketing functions, the teams that would sort of build the right story and build the right campaigns to help us to generate awareness and to deliver the set of tools to help our sales colleagues sell the product. So I evolved from engineering to managing engineers to managing managers of multiple projects, and then to getting more management responsibilities beyond engineering, which started to bring in the aspects of being a general manager, where it was about the product and delivery, it was about the marketing and sales, and it was also about the technical support of the product. So I ended up starting getting what is called, I call it the life cycle of a product and an offering as the general manager. And then over time, those roles start to expand more and more in terms of having more and more of the company's portfolio. So the one job that I talked about, the Unix business, that was a job that had multiple labs in multiple locations, sales resources in over the 190 plus countries IBM did business in, a group of professionals that will work on the marketing and merchandising programs, and a group of executives that will work on, because we were a global business, how do we conduct and move product and offerings on a global basis. And then ultimately, the real big P&L that I had in IBM was IBM's hardware business, which a good way to think about IBM, IBM is hardware, software, services, and research. We have one of the largest commercial research organizations in the world, a large services organization, our middleware software suite, and then hardware, which we called it hardware, but it was really systems, because it was more than hardware, because it had the operating system component and some of the management solution to so that the system can actually, or the hardware can actually run. And I had the distinct honor of running all of the product development for that for a number of years, but also being the general manager for that, which was nearly a $30 billion business for IBM, with well over 100,000 resources across the business, labs, and 43 labs. I believe they were in like 27 countries or locations, and sales resources in 190 countries around the world.
It's funny, you could say 30 billion and now it sounds so commonplace, but at that time it was a massive number. It still is, but
it still is. Yeah, it still is. It is. And
I would just say, because now you have companies that are $1 trillion in valuation companies, but back then it was just not a thing that was on the horizon back when you were managing such a sizable budget.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and and IBM has always been one of the leading companies in the marketplace. And to your point, the landscape has it constantly changes and it constantly shifts. And because of the emergence of social media, cloud and analytics, and new types of solutions, that has allowed the creation of new types of technology companies. So it is more players in the overall information technology space than it was 10 years ago, and certainly more than 20 years ago or even 30 years ago.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned that getting that first general manager job was sort of an inflection point for your career. What was it like when you got that call, and did it give you a sense of, man, I could be well on my way?
No, it was a great call, and I again, it's back to my motto of, okay, once I was in the chair, I started thinking about the next two jobs, because I was always that guy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was grounded in reality, because I knew that this all depended on what have you done lately. So all of these things are sort of connected with me. And I knew in that first general manager's role, I really had to hit the ball hard, and not hitting a single or a double. It had to be something like a triple or a home run or a grand slam. Because I always tell people, you always want to be known for something by someone. And this was my opportunity to establish my brand that Rod Adkins has consistently delivered. And he is now in this sort of big, very visible role. And, I had to make sure that narrative was not going to change. So I was very focused on execution, very focused on performance, very focused on outcome. The other thing along the way, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but you don't become successful alone. So this notion of, a lot of people like to use the word, well, I did it. No, we did it, because I did have help along the way. So when you start to think about the mentors that I had, or even the team that I built around me that supported me in the journey that we were on, I had a great support structure, and it was a number of people that was instrumental in that journey. And I always would tell people about what I thought good leadership was. I always said sort of three principles around good leadership. It's like, know when to listen, and that is this notion of surrounding yourself with the right people. Know when to learn, and this is back to my firm belief that you always have to stay intellectually curious. You always have to be focused on learning new and relevant things. You just can't ever become complacent. And then I would call it, the last one is know how to leverage. And I mean leverage in a positive way, because you always have to know how to get things done with or through people. And, in IBM, I do get a lot of credit of being a pretty good leader, because I would always talk about, bad leaders always think people work for them. And I always would say good leaders think people work with them. But I always viewed myself as a good leader, because a great leader, because I always said great leaders think that they work for the people. And so my success is a shared story, although I get the benefit of saying, yep, I was the first African-American to be appointed senior vice president in IBM. But it's a lot of people that continues and should celebrate in that success, because I didn't get there alone. I surrounded myself with great people, and then because of my style and approach, you know, people would sort of volunteer to help me along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you, speaking of people who helped you along the way, there was a point where you had to consider, I think you mentioned you worked in Japan or some overseas assignments. Yeah. How did you reach that decision, and what influences sort of factored in you taking on that responsibility?
Well, it turns out IBM has these, and I probably should have said this earlier, they have these developmental roles that they're called executive assistants, where they will take a high potential individual out of their sort of line role and assign them to a very senior executive, anywhere between, I call it 9 months to 18 months. And that person would shadow that senior executive. And as part of that process, you get some specific assignments, but as part of that process, you get to sort of watch a leader in action. And one of the assignments I was on, while I was on that assignment, the senior executive resigned from IBM. As a matter of fact, he went to go be a very, very senior executive for a company at the time. It was called Lotus 123. And it actually became a company that later IBM acquired, and it became part of our software portfolio. But when that executive left and the new executive came in, the new executive today is a very dear friend and has been a coach, a mentor, you know, all of the above for me in IBM. His name was Nick D'Onofrio. And one of the first things he did when he came in was he sent me on a short assignment to Japan. And this was back when we were looking at making computing mobile. And I had the opportunity to spend some time in our Yamato laboratory with the Japanese team. And that was one of these assignments where, I didn't get to participate in whether or not I was going to do that. Nick just thought it was the right thing for me to do, and it turns out he was right. And as a matter of fact, most of the assignments I've had in my career over the years, he played some role. Whether it was recommending me for certain things, or coaching me for certain things, or in some cases I took the initiative to say, "Hey, Nick, please provide advice and counsel." So Nick has played a role throughout my career. And Nick he wasn't really the only mentor, but he was a good example of what I describe as fit for purpose. He was that mentor that helped me in terms of thinking through things. And then once I was in the job, he would help me in terms of, if I needed to deal with a gap or needed extra help in a specific area. He was always that mentor that I can call, Nick D'Onofrio. And then I had other mentors along the way. And even to this day, I'm retired from IBM. I'm successful on a number of boards. I'm doing a lot of consulting work. But I also say I still have mentors. I still talk to Nick. And then I've acquired a new mentor, John Jacobs, who was a very successful business executive, and also the former head of the Urban League. And he and I have formed a great relationship because I am still at a point in life where I can always learn something new and interesting from someone else. And John sort of represents that mentoring opportunity for me these days.
Yeah, certainly. So you and I want to get to where you transitioned to board service, but before that, you're a general manager. You get this assignment to move to Austin, which is pretty significant. What was the series of events or roles that led to you now becoming named as a vice president within the company, and then how did that lead to you ultimately ascending or assuming a role as a senior vice president?
So IBM has a interesting sort of flow of titles because I actually became a vice president before I became a general manager. And then from general manager, I had a series of general manager jobs, and then I was appointed senior vice president. So my vice president roles, they were mostly vice presidents of an engineering function. So I was a vice president of development, as an example. I was the vice president for operations type jobs. And then I was promoted to general manager, where a general manager in IBM has a series of vice presidents reporting to them. So that the general manager could have a vice president of sales, a vice president of marketing, a vice president of operations, a vice president of finance, a vice president of development. So I had a series of general management jobs. And by the way, as part of that general management job, you get a P&L because you are not only managing cost and expense, you are building products and solutions that get marketed and sold in the various markets and geographies we participate in. So you're now in the arena of helping the company meet its financial, in a very significant way, meet its financial objectives in terms of both growth, which and also profit and bottom line performance. And at the end of the day, your goal is to generate shareholder value. So I was general manager of desktop PCs, and I was general manager, which was a P&L role. I was general manager of this Unix business that I talked to you about that was a turnaround. I was general manager of pervasive computing, which was this early view of what is IoT today. So I had a series of general manager jobs managing P&Ls. And then I got to the point where the company said, okay, he's proven. And I actually became senior vice president of and the title was development and manufacturing, where I had the role of managing all of the development functions and some of our manufacturing functions, because we had these fabs that build semiconductors, which was both engineering, but it was also manufacturing, because these fabs or manufacturing sites had to produce the chips that would go into our systems that we would build, and then some of the technologies we would sell to other technology partners. So I became the senior vice president of that technical area. And then 2 years later, I was promoted to senior vice president of systems and technology group, which included that technical area. But then again, it brought in all of the marketing, the sales, the finance functions, et cetera. So I had sort of really 3 senior vice president jobs in IBM. One over IBM's technical resources, one managing the hardware, or my definition, systems P&L. And then the last assignment I had was senior vice president of corporate strategy, which was when I decided it was time for me to be thinking about life after IBM. And I had a great opportunity to be the steward for IBM's long-term strategy for about 1.5 years before I retired. So from 2007 to 2014, that was the various opportunities I had as senior vice president at IBM. As a matter of fact, recently, great news, because I always would tell people that I didn't think my story at IBM was complete by being the first and only senior vice president, because I was appointed in 2007, retired in 2014. And, one would like to think that someone that looks like you will have an opportunity at, high-end jobs like that, an opportunity to sit at the table. And most recently, IBM actually named this second senior vice president. So although 2007 to 2020, 13 years later, the good news is it has been more than one in IBM history.
Certainly, and it is tremendous the times that we're experiencing in 2020 with so many of those shifts, and it was great to hear that news. That you're still a history maker, but history has been made twice now at IBM, and I think the sights continue to be set on sort of smashing that final glass ceiling. If you look across the corporate spectrum, I think within the ranks of Fortune 500 CEOs, I think we're down to about 3 who are African American now, and so it's something that guys like myself look at, and we're constantly trying to think, okay, what does progress really represent when you forecast out, the latter years of, perhaps our most active working career days. But you finally retire in 2014. I've got to ask, what did it feel like? I presume at some point your picture got placed on the website for IBM.
What happened on the website?
Yeah, they must have placed your picture up at some point on the website, and that's when it's like you have finally arrived. And so, what was it like the first time you got wind of, oh, I'm on the website now?
Honestly, I think my reaction was a typical reaction that says, "Boy, back to those family values. Hard work. Commitment, responsibility. To me, that's when it sort of all sort of came together. Because I talked about a lot of things in my upbringing, which was foundational. But it was one of probably the most powerful reflective moments that you can go through, where you can just say, boy, this journey, it was a road, it was a road traveled hard, but boy, at the end of the day, it just felt right. And it felt right because of the preparation along the way. So when I think about the family influence, when I think about the sensei, Herbert Thompson, talk about his 3 things, when I think about the community influence, when I think about the influence from K through 12, being that student with perfect attendance, when I think about all of those things, always being focused on, it's never enough when it comes to curiosity. It's never enough when it comes to learning new things. And when that moment came together, and by the way, taking the hard jobs, the guy that didn't sleep much, which is catching up with me in these later years. But, when people were sleeping, I was working, so when you start to think about all of those sacrifices coming together, it was probably one of the most powerful reflective moments. And as a matter of fact, I at times I'm a daydreamer. I think I said that earlier. And I always believed in the power of daydreaming because it allows you to sort of put yourself in certain positions, you know. And I know as a kid, a lot of us daydream. You know, you always think about, because we're in the NBA finals now, you know, you always think about being that kid in the game that takes the last shot, you know, and you know, you make the shot at the buzzer. You know, I had those thoughts, but I also had these thoughts that I was the kid that was getting on the elevator with a briefcase in my hand, going to the top floor. I would always envision myself in places like that. And it was just a beautiful thing when that sort of image becomes real. When that image becomes real. So your point on being on the website or being on the top floor in Armonk, where the top officers of the company sit, it was just such a powerful feeling for someone like me to be there. And what made it more sort of impactful was I wasn't, these feelings wasn't really about just me. It was really about back to the team. It was really about we, you know. It was an opportunity as people from all walks of life, as they look up in the organization, you know, they see a Rod Adkins, and whether you were African American or not, I did have a brand that represented something. And I think I had some appealing things that, you know, when people think about Rod, you know, Rod always treated people like how he wanted to be treated. You know, that was Rod. Rod was always approachable. My office was always open, and I had time for the lowest level, you know, technician to the chairman or CEO or the board of directors of IBM. To me, everyone played a role and everyone had value. So I always had time for everyone, and that was sort of who I stood for. But I also fought for my constituency. I made sure that as you think about the employment life cycle, you know, we as a company, and this wasn't hard to do in IBM, but as a company, it was all about attracting the best skill. And then once we get the best skill into the company, it was really about how we develop those skills, how we advance those skills, how we recognize and retain those skills. And, you know, I actually would say that was my night job at IBM, because I had a mentoring network that it got to the point where I couldn't even tell you how many. There were literally hundreds and hundreds of mentees, because I felt it was my responsibility to make sure that we had a pipeline of talent. And that pipeline of talent, it needed to be diverse, but it also needed to have a lot of people that look like me as well. Because the right business proposition is, you know, I always believe the best companies are the companies that really leverage the power of diversity, leverage the power of inclusion. And, you know, and I sort of walked the talk when it came to that. So, you know, my view is when I was sitting there and sort of soaking in those moments, you know, it was just so real from the standpoint of all of these things I stood for and all of the preparation that went towards that. It was a very powerful moment. And even to this day, you know, as we speak, it's just a powerful feeling that I have had an impact. And I think I will continue to have an impact, although a lot of my focus these days has sort of shifted to the world of philanthropy. But that is just another angle in terms of giving back. It's just another angle in terms of giving back.
Certainly. And I will talk about your philanthropy here in a second as we try to conclude the interview. But you transitioned at the end of sort of the first phase of your career, as you like to call it, But then you transition into sort of playing a role as someone who serves on corporate boards. What was that transition like, and what has that experience been like over the last, several years?
So, and I'm glad you used the word transition, because I think it's a perfect word, because it's hard to say that I retired, because I am just as active, I'm just as engaged, and I'm probably just as busy. And that the transition for me was, I would probably say I didn't really miss a beat, because when I graduated from IBM, I ended up on 5 public boards, serving on 5 public boards. And then I would say it was about 10 other boards in terms of nonprofits, university boards, foundations, my fraternity foundation, so I was very actively engaged. And it was a different type of busyness, in a different type of intensity. I ended up working on many things, as opposed to, when I was in business, it was much more structured and focused and concentrated. And the thing I tell people, I actually prepared for this second chapter in life, which is also one of my lessons that I tell people, that, when it's time for you to transition, think about it sooner versus later, because just like how you prepare to become a manager or prepare to become a leader in terms of getting the right skills and the experiences and the training, you also have to prepare for life after your primary profession. And in this case, I decided I wanted to be a director on public company boards. And there are some things you need to do to prepare to become a director. Obviously, it is easier to become a director if you have an established name and a brand and a track record in the marketplace. But boards look for certain skills. Actually, boards, they publish what is called a skills matrix. And you have to figure out how you fit into that skills matrix, because the board needs a full complement of capabilities to run a productive and effective board. So, I started picking up more skills around logistics and distribution, although I had the technology background. And I also started, back to this lifelong learning, picking up more understanding about cybersecurity. So, so all of a sudden, I've had untold number of board opportunities because of my successful IBM career. But at the same time, I have developed talent in other areas like logistics and distribution, cybersecurity, et cetera. So preparation went into my board life. One of the jobs that I don't talk much about is I actually had IBM supply chain as well. This is the organization that does all of the procurement for the company. And this was when I had the systems and technology P&L. So I always tell people, I had 2 jobs in IBM, the day job, which was running the systems and technology P&L, but the supply chain job that purchased everything from parts, supplies, and services to run the $100 billion IBM enterprise. And at the time, I didn't realize what a blessing that was. At the time, it was pain, but looking forward, it was actually a blessing, because UPS is a logistics and distribution company. Rod Adkins ran IBM's supply chain. Well, that is like an instant match. Granger, an industrial MRO company, logistics and distribution. Well, Rod Adkins ran IBM's supply chain. Avnet, I'm the chairman of the board now, but that's an IT distribution company.
Mm.
And Rod, of course, they wanted me for the technology and the strategy, but the fact that I ran the supply chain helped me quite a bit. So the message here is prepare for that transition. And if you're interested in boards, really understand, how boards operate, because it's really sort of tough getting attention, from a board company. But it boils down to, how do you fit from a skills perspective, your track record and your reputation, and then the third component is figuring out who are the decision makers on the board, and it's typically the chairman, the CEO, and the person that's running nomination and governance. As a matter of fact, I remember my very first board, Pitney Bowes. I was working for IBM. I ended up on that board, and how I ended up on that board? Well, I found out who the nomination and governance committee chairperson was, and I figured out a way for that person to meet me. And I actually told him why Pitney Bowes would benefit from my services on the board. And he found that intriguing and a very innovative approach. And I ended up meeting the chairman, I ended up meeting the CEO, and my very first public board was Pitney Bowes. And then after 5 years, I ended up not standing for re-election, joined UPS board, and then after UPS board, I joined Granger, Avnet, Pennsylvania Power on a power utility board, and then also PayPal.
Yeah.
So that's my history with boards and post-retirement.
Well, just know I was making mental notes and daydreaming myself about what lies ahead. So
yes.
Thanks for sharing those very important tips about what really does matter, being prepared for what comes next. But I think also for young people, and I'll share it, it's a desire of mine to serve on corporate boards in the future, but you've really clearly articulated how to approach it and steps that one needs to take to develop the skill sets that boards find valuable. So let's pivot and talk about sort of your life's mission now. You've talked about what you're doing and your focus on philanthropy. Would you talk a bit about some of what you've been up to?
So Michelle and I, back to my lifelong partner, who has, again, she's part of the journey. She's part of the success. She had a very successful professional career for about 10 years as a practicing CPA, but we got to a point where she decided to focus on raising our two young men who have become successful citizens, contributing citizens, and we've sort of together shift gears more towards how we can give back more. And some of this is from the fact that we've been fortunate. We have done pretty well here, and and we're blessed. I would say we're blessed, and I just have this view in life that when you're blessed, you should share your blessings if and when you can, and that's what we have dedicated our time going forward to. So we're very active in a number of things. We have a number of named scholarships for African American students. Since I'm a scientist, most of my scholarships focus on African Americans in the STEM disciplines. Some of them are merit based, but some of them are needs based because some kids actually develop later than others. They're sort of a diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
And over time, with the right environment, they become responsible citizens, responsible contributing citizens. So we actually have scholarships that try to focus on people that have demonstrated great academic capabilities, but people that they may not be as strong academically. They have needs, but they have demonstrated a willingness to do other things like community-based work, and other types of extracurricular, which says that they are somewhat of a rounded human being. So we have a number of scholarships at a few universities that we sponsor. My largest contribution in life was, the Smithsonian, National Museum of African American History and Culture, the new museum on the mall. And I served on the Smithsonian board, national board, for 10 years. So I had the opportunity to watch when we first put the shovel in the ground to when we had the grand opening, and to also watch this museum become really one of the number one attractions, frankly, in the world. When you think about, the desire of people, and not just African Americans, because I think the last number I saw was during the peak times, about 30% of the people attending the museum were non-African Americans, and we were getting a lot of attendees from global citizens attending the museum. And the reason why this is a big deal, and the reason why Michelle and I wanted to be founding donors, is because I think this is one of the most powerful statements to be a part of something that's going to be enduring. And it is a product that tells a more complete and comprehensive story about America's history. So we like to call it the African American Museum of History and Culture, which it is, and it is giving us a view of our history through an African American lens, but it completes the American experience. It completes the American story. So we have been very proud of being part of what I think is going to be a continuous journey, because I think it's just an absolute spectacular creation, and it has resonated extremely well across most constituencies. The other thing we're proud of, we're both, of course, we met at Georgia Tech. So we have scholarships at Georgia Tech. We are very active at Georgia Tech. Our youngest son graduated from Georgia Tech. So we're sort of a Georgia Tech family. But in the center of campus, there is an exhibit called Continuing the Conversation. It is Rosa Parks at age, life-size figure of Rosa Parks at age 42 and Rosa Parks at age 92. They are, then these life-size figures, they're sitting across from each other. And there's a bench in the middle that invites you into a conversation that says, I wonder what young Rosa would talk to the more mature Rosa about, or vice versa. And the significance of the piece is at age 42 is when Rosa refused to give up her seat. The story about that. And then she passed away at age 92. So that represents 50 years. But that 50 years of history, we were also celebrating at Georgia Tech. And it's in a special place at Georgia Tech. It's called Harrison Square. Harrison was, the sixth president of Georgia Tech, but he was the guy that desegregated the school before it was law. So he was the one that allowed the first Black students on campus. It was also to celebrate 50 years of when the Black Student Union, or the first Black organization, was established at Georgia Tech, and it also happens to align with the assassination, the anniversary of assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. So when we donated this piece to Tech, we had the benefit of having various generations of the Harrison family, the King family, and the Park family that participated in that unveiling and that donation to Tech. And since then, that piece has inspired a number of other donations to the campus, where we now have life-size figures of the first 4 African Americans that attended Georgia Tech. And there are some other things that's in the work. Now think about that. This is Georgia Tech Atlanta, center of the campus. So we're doing things like that to make hopefully an impact on society. And then I would say the last thing we're focused on, we're doing some things locally because we're from Miami, and we sponsor a series called Free Gospel Sunday, which brings in some of the top gospel artists 3 times a year. And it is free to the public. And what that has done, it has allowed people from the inner city, from the communities that look like us, to have an opportunity to see a high quality event at the Performing Arts Center here in Miami. And these events attract a large number of people, and the key word is free, because Michelle and I, with others, we underwrite the event, and we get artists like Ty Tribbett and Yolanda Adams and et cetera. So, I mean, these are the big names in gospel music. And so those are just some examples of some of the things that we are doing and will continue to do to have an impact and share our blessings.
Certainly. You received a number of awards over your career, and I'm sure it continues. Which ones stand out most?
That's a tough one, but because I'm a proud engineer. There's an appointment to what is called the National Academy of Engineering, which is one of the highest honors that you can receive in the engineering profession. And by the way it works, the only way you become appointed academy is the membership appoints you. So it's a governed organization. It was put in place by President Roosevelt. And this organization, we do special studies and assignments for the government and other agencies. So the National Academy of Engineering, I would say, is my most prized possession, because it's just really a statement of the impact and the contributions that I have had on the field of engineering. And when you look at my citation, it talks about the impact that I've had on products ranging from mobile devices to the world's largest supercomputers that enable our government, in terms of protecting our nation and helping businesses run their enterprise. So that's sort of how my citation reads in terms of my contribution across a broad range of computing solutions that has had a positive impact on businesses in the United States. So that's my most prized possession. I would say probably after that, my 2 honorary doctorate degrees. The one, Georgia Tech, is an interesting one. Georgia Tech is one of the oldest institutions around, and I was actually the first African American to receive a honorary doctorate degree, and it was perfect because it was when my youngest son graduated. So he and I graduated together. I received my honorary doctorate, and he received his undergraduate degree. And then my second doctorate from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I got to admit, I must be the luckiest father in the world. But I received that doctorate when my oldest son graduated. And I don't know how many people can tell that story. But he graduated from UMBC. I was recognized with an honorary doctorate. And I would say the reason why I put those high on the list is because of sort of the impact it has had as part of the family. And, you know, my two young men, I still think of them as my boys, but they're my two young men. Yeah. One is an accomplished artist and author. That's my youngest one. He has now published his first book when he was 19, and now he's 29, and he's published his third book, and he has a number of short films and movies that he's produced. And then my other son, who's an accomplished sales executive in the healthcare arena. So those, I would say those are my high on the list. And then the third one, which I think you and I share, one of the most distinguished recognitions you can get from my fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, is the Distinguished Laurel Wreath Award. And I became a recipient of that recognition in 2017. I was in the history of the fraternity when it was founded in 1911 on the campus of Indiana University. I became the 73rd recipient of that award. So, and since when you're in fraternity and sorority life, you know, my designation was number 3. So those were my top three awards.
Excellent. So what's on the horizon for Rod Adkins at this point?
You know, there was this guy, I think he was a short-term chairman for I think it was the Coca-Cola company, and he had a famous quote that I like. He said, "Never let your memories be greater than your dreams." And I thought that was, again, sort of consistent with who I am. And although we talked a lot about my past, I am still very, very ambitious and engaged in terms of what more I can do going forward. And that's one of the reasons why we have decided to leverage some of our resources to help make a difference. So I am actively spending a lot of my time trying to get more African Americans on boards. So I am dedicated in doing that. I am also dedicated in terms of how we can get more African Americans in the STEM disciplines. So I am very, very focused and dedicated in doing that. And then I would say the third thing would be, being a voice and doing as much as I can to deal with a lot of the systemic racism and social unrest that we are dealing with today, in the hopes that whatever we do and continue to do, we get to a point where we will eliminate that cancer from our society. So if I had to sort of pick the three things, that's where I will be investing most of my time going forward. And it's a lot to do there. We're making progress in terms of getting African Americans on boards, but it's still a lot to do there. If you look at the number of scientists that engineers, mathematicians, technologists that we're producing, there's still a lot to do there. And of course, we're still dealing with some of the imbalance that was created. And this sort of next chapter is really about the focus on boards, STEM, and then doing all I can in my role to help make sure that we have a much more balanced opportunity playing field moving forward.
Well, I'll get you with the final question. It's a two-part. What do you see next for technology? And then any closing remarks you might want to share.
So, we're in probably one of the most interesting periods of time when you think about innovation. And I referred to back in the early 80s, when we sort of changed the world of computing with client server. That was a very interesting time when computing moved from this sort of large centralized structure to a system that could be in your home or in your hand. And now we're moving into an era where, because we embedded intelligence in so many things, these things are now connected, and they're generating all types of new information and data. So this is now what I would describe as the era of cognitive opportunities or cognitive systems. You'll hear us talk more about artificial intelligence, machine learning. I did have the benefit to end my career on the early stages of what I would call the cognitive era with the introduction of a system we call Watson, which played on Jeopardy in 2011. And now we have IBM has commercialized a system to do other important work. And the world is moving more towards how do you ingest a lot of data, good data, bad data, and extract the insights from that information. And that is sort of the age that we are moving into. So you're going to see more technologies playing a central role going forward. Cloud computing will continue to play more of a major role. Analytics will play more of a major role. Artificial intelligence will continue to play a major role. The social applications and solutions will play a major role. Security will play a major role. So all these things will be sort of wrapped into how we deal with the opportunities moving forward. So I just think this is just an incredible opportunity for this generation. My generation, innovation was sort of defined as technology advancing. This new generation actually they still have that in terms of technology advancing, but they also have some interesting things happening in terms of changing business models, so how businesses will connect with their markets and conduct business on a global basis. And we're seeing a lot of different ways in which how we work and how we live is changing because of advances in technologies, but also how the business model around those technologies are changing. So looking forward, the future is really, really, really bright. When I think about things like how augmented reality, virtual reality will play a role in transforming things like healthcare. So you could have a physician in some other part of the world who is the best expert performing a critical surgery on a patient in some other part of the world by just using the virtual technologies and visualization technologies, connected with robotics and autonomous solutions. So when you start to think about the possibilities, there will, it is really sort of no limit in terms of where things are going. In fact, we embedded intelligence and we are connecting the world. Now, all of that sounds great because when you do that, you also have bad actors. And there are bad people out there that will also attempt to take advantage of the advancements in technologies. As a matter of fact, I remind people that the cyber crime industry is a $1 trillion industry. You look at all of the fraud and breaches and ransomware and all that. When you add all of that stuff up, that is a huge industry that's attracting bad actors. So, like any advancement, you're gonna get the good and some of the ugly and the bad, and hopefully, as a society, we will figure out how to leverage more good and eliminate some of the bad and the ugly. So, it's fascinating opportunities in front of us.
Incredible, $1 trillion industry,
Yeah.
just engaging in technological malfeasance. So,
Right. That's right. That's right.
Any closing comments you might want to share?
No, I just to sort of wrap back. One of my favorite quotes was by Jimi Hendrix. He in one of his songs he said, "Knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens." And I always thought that was a very powerful statement, because one of the things I always prided myself with is I listen well, and I always seek the knowledge, and then I translate that into action, which you can say that's where the wisdom plays out. And Jimi Hendrix actually was an interesting guy. He was a prophet of the '60s. Most people don't know this, but his main stage acting career only lasted 4 years.
Incredible.
But when we talk about him today, he is among the discussion in terms of one of the greatest guitar players to have ever graced us with his talent. And he did all of that in 4 short years. So he's an interesting human being from that perspective. But I think his statement is a very, very powerful statement. The last thing I'll leave you with is Nelson Mandela, one of my favorite quotes. He basically said, it always seems impossible until it is done. It is done. It always seems impossible until it is done. And again, think about the journey that I've been on. There have been times it felt impossible. But now looking back, it was sort of a calculated approach, because it had good foundation and it also had good discipline. And I think when you sort of combine those two things, you can make things that may seem to be impossible, and you can convert them into a reality. So I trust that, some of the things I had to say here will have some meaning, will have some impact. But again, at the end of the day, my journey, I am very pleased and proud with, but it's not my journey. It was our journey, because I did have a number of people that share in this success. And as we discussed, I am not even close to end the job. I still have a few more things I need to get done. So thank you.
Here, and I'm so delighted to have a front row seat to watch you work, with so much more yet to be done. Just to recap, you've talked to us about the early lessons you learned about time in focus and balance. You talked about the importance of creativity, curiosity, and daydreaming. You've talked about understanding the need to always operate at the top of your game. You further talked about knowing when to listen, when to leverage, and when to learn. My guest today has been Rod Adkins. My name is Lawley Davis Yemerton, and you've been listening to My Brother Podcast.